All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get started. Thank y'all for coming. We are going to take up House Bill 1464. That'll be the only bill we'll take up today. This will be a hearing only today. We have another date set for tomorrow, 10 to noon. I think we're back here in this room in 606. All right. I'll call on Representative Burchett, the Chairman Burchett, and it's his bill. If you would please give us a rundown of what you got in the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for hearing me today on House Bill 1464. Just for clarity, I'm working off of LC 280511S. And this bill is a amalgamation of several different ideas that were previously submitted into one bill. And if the chair so pleases, I'll go section by section through the bill and tell you what the bill does, and also have Mr. Ryan Germany from the Secretary of State's office here with me to help explain any questions that I cannot. And I'll just start with that, if that's okay.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so starting in section 1. Well, first off, let me give you an overview of the bill. An overview of the bill is there's many provisions in here for chain of custody for ballots as they are cast. And that includes ballots from drop boxes and absentee ballots. That essentially sets out a chain of custody. There is no chain of custody provisions in the current code. That is the largest portion of this bill. It requires a chain of custody that we have sealed boxes and seal, not numbered seals, but seals that require a cutting, and also a sort of sheet that tracks who has touched the ballots and how many they've touched and what they've done with those ballots. Many of these sections deal strictly with that. The first section here we have is let's see here. This changes the state election board. The appointments to the state election board when someone challenges a let me see, I'm going to use the correct terminology here. What's that? Yeah, 62. Oh, I am missing page 3. Sorry, had it backwards here. Section 1 deals with the gifts and grants. Currently, under Senate Bill 202, we disallowed any gifts or grants directly to any board of elections. But what this does is requires a process that any gifts and grants that are proposed must go through the process and go through the state board of elections to be allocated as they see fit. Currently, there is nothing in the law that requires that. So that's what section 1 does. And that's lines mainly 49 through 63. Any donation, private person or non-government entity seeking to give a gift or grant to a county election board must seek to go through the state board of elections and this process to be approved to give that grant. So you can still give the grant, but you have to go through the process. You can't give it directly to the county or directly to the board of elections. Okay. Section 2 is what I started on earlier. The process that we outlaid in Senate Bill 202 for requesting a performance review of any elections officials. It contemplates a 3-person board to review the election officials And what this does is give some more levity on the persons that can serve on that board. On lines 82, you can see it can be a member of the County Board of Elections or County Board of Elections and Registration versus before it was just Secretary of State and the state individuals. Let's see, state to whom? Let me show look. All right, next is going to be local elections. Ryan, help me out on this one, if you will.
Chairman, the point here is there was some confusion on the first, after legislature asked the state election board to perform a performance review of Fulton County. The law says the members of that performance review team are an individual appointed by the Secretary of State from the Elections Division, and then 2 local election officials. I think the intent was to appoint 2 actually people from local elections boards who have that local expertise. The way the law was written, it kind of says you have to appoint the local election official defined as the superintendent, which is actually the Board of Elections. The state election board interpreted it to actually mean an individual member of the board, not the entire board. But this just clarifies what we think was the actual intent and meant by the current law. So it's just a clarification.
And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I'm going to lean heavily on Mr. Germany as this most recent LC has just gotten into my fingers. So we're going to move on to, let's see, section 3. And this is say that again. All right, this is in the section 3, excuse me, section 3. This is the same for the gift to registrars is essentially the same prohibition that you see in section 1, that any gift or grant must go through the state board to be allocated as per the state board, state election board's determination, not for no direct gift giving, excuse me. Section 4 is, so this in Senate Bill 202, the language requires that there be 1 machine per 250 electors. In section 4, what we're saying is that if there are multiple, if many people have already voted in early voting, we're allowing that machines can be the number of machines can be dictated by the remaining electors to vote versus having to certify having to have a machine and certify a machine for every elector. If it makes no sense to have that many machines if we only have a certain number of electors left. Do you want to add anything to that, Mr. German?
The only thing I would add is that there are provisions from SB 202 regarding long lines and what counties have to do if there is ever a line of more than an hour and tracking line lengths. And so those provisions still remain in place to, ensure that, there's not long lines at polling places.
I'm going to dish this off to Ryan for the next 2 sections till we get to the section.
Section 5 is some more cleanup language related to SB 202. And the first change is in line 179, and it deals with applications. Application for absentee ballot sent out by third-party groups. In SB 202, there's a disclaimer requirement for if you're sending out an absentee ballot application and you're a third-party group doing those mailings. In the legislative process, at the end of the bill, at the end of the process, it was determined that everyone needs to use the official absentee ballot application form, but the disclaimer language was kind of left over from an earlier version of the bill. So all we're doing is updating that disclaimer language to make it a little clearer that the application is being sent out by, identify who the group is, they are not a government entity, and that this is not a ballot, because those are kind of the two questions that I think our office and secretary and the local election offices get most. And then the next change is down on line 226 and 227 is to clarify SB 202 about sending out unsolicited absentee ballots, and it clarifies that it applies to mailing unsolicited applications. There are some questions about, can people, put out a stack of absentee ballot applications or do something like that at a neighborhood? And that's, I think, not the conduct that SB 202 was trying to put some guardrails around. The main thing that led to confusion, I think, in 2020 was mailings that voters received. That's really what I think caused confusion, that led to calls to our office. And so this clarifies that's really the conduct that this section goes to. It distinguishes between people who are mailing out ballots and then people who are, doing stuff on a small scale, making things available to neighbors or friends or things like that. Section 6 is another cleanup. 3.21-2-381-2 requires the county to include a blank ballot called a state write-in absentee ballot with overseas ballot packages. The thought process behind that at the time was that could essentially serve as your runoff ballot if you don't get your runoff ballot in time. SB 202 changed the process for that, where now the voter gets the original ballot for the primary, and at the same time, the overseas voter gets a ranked choice ballot. So I think this section was kind of functionally repealed by SB 202. So this just sort of formalizes that. Section 7, you want chain of custody. Yeah. This relates to chain of custody requirements for Dropbox ballots, and requires a chain of custody documentation for when people are returning Dropbox ballots to the county elections office. Section 8 is additional chain of custody for absentee ballots. For when absentee ballots come in, it's been, I think, edited some from Chairman Powell's original bill to kind of reflect that the numbered seal requirement really comes into effect at the end of the process, whereas while the ballots are being verified and then stored and then scanned, there has to be chain of custody documentation and secure storage, but then reflecting that those ballots still have to be worked on by local election officials during that time. And then those are all the changes in section 8, our chain of custody for absentee ballots. Section 9, this edits an existing law. Existing law requires employers to let employees have time off work to go vote if they need it on election day. This just expands that requirement to include early in-person voting as well, which I think gives a little more flexibility for both employers and employees, so people can go vote in person. Section 10, this is some changes to the poll watcher requirement. It makes a couple clarifications. Some of the issues we saw in 2020 were not every election location has sufficient space for all certified poll watchers. But it's important, obviously, that certified poll watchers have that meaningful level of access. So it makes a couple of changes. One, it makes clear that the parties who can appoint poll watchers are parties who have candidates on the ballot. It clarifies that poll watchers are subject to reasonable regulations to prevent overcrowding and interference with official duties, but that they shall be entitled to meaningful access to polling places, advanced voting locations, tabulation centers, and locations where absentee ballots are being verified, processed, adjudicated, and scanned. It also clarifies that in any location where a voter's personal information is visible, for instance, in like verifying an absentee ballot, that the poll watcher can't write anything down, record anything, take any pictures, which are, it's essentially the normal poll watcher sort of restrictions, but adds that they can't actually write anything down in those areas either. It also adds a requirement for poll watchers to take an oath prior to serving as a poll watcher, saying that they'll abide by these laws and regulations, and they'll report any potential fraud or abuse or irregularities that they see. And it clarifies for election officials in line 733, when they're creating reasonable regulations to deal with overcrowding or interference with duties, that if they should give prioritize access for electors exercising their right to vote, the safety of poll officers and election officials, and fair and meaningful access for certified poll watchers. Sometimes at a polling place, it can get confusing as to who's who, because there's a lot of people who are there who are not a certified poll watcher from one of the parties or one of the candidates. They're kind of a self-proclaimed poll watcher. That's perfectly fine. And there's a level of access for the public as well. But I do think the law envisions a higher level of access for the party's certified poll watchers. And that's why they have kind of higher obligations regarding training. We're proposing the oath. And that the final piece of this is that if there's ever a time where the poll manager can't allow all the poll watchers in, because some polling locations are small, then they need to ensure a partisan balance of poll watchers are allowed appropriate access. Section 11 is an additional chain of custody documentation dealing with provisional ballot boxes when you remove the provisional ballots from the ballot box in the polling place to take them to the county elections office. Section 12. This is additional chain of custody. I think this relates to when poll managers or the poll workers are bringing ballots on the materials back from the polling place to the county election office at the end of the night. And we essentially tried to kind of lean heavily on existing state election board regulation here, so that it should be a process that's familiar to poll workers. Section 13, this is another cleanup to SB 202. In SB 202, there was a section, I call it the denominator rule, which basically says by 10 p.m., counties need to post publicly how many total votes have you had. And the rationale for that was in 2020, some counties were asked, well onto election night, well, how many more absentee ballots do you have to count? And they didn't know. So what this bill did was, what SB 202 did was require, okay, you've got to tell us the total number of ballots by 10 p.m. What we found in implementing this bill with working with counties in 2021, the hardest part of that to implement was actually the polling place election day numbers. And it pulled election workers off of actually just getting results uploaded. So what the only change we're making here is, I think the real intent of this rule is they want to know how many total absentee ballots you've had that are received by the time of the deadline. And so all this does is clarify that this rule applies to absentee ballots, and you go ahead and you post that number and not election day ballots. Section 14, this is additional, this deals with actually the paper ballots after the election. So after certification, and they're kept in Superior Court. Currently, they're kept under seal. This removes the under seal and basically gives access. When you look at sections 14 and 15, And then the real language is in, I think, section 16. Section 16, it deals with who can get access to those ballots after the election. Currently, they're under seal. You have to go to court and get the seal, get a judge to lift the seal. This essentially lets people view them, but puts some restrictions around that for not touching or physically handling them. And you have to have a clerk or the county records manager there who's kind of authorized to show those materials. This is part of an existing bill that I think has been in the Government Affairs Committee, I believe. I'm not sure. But it just incorporates that existing bill. Section 17, I think it's as important as poll watcher access. We also want to make sure that poll workers are protected. And I think, with this year, I think we will see more active poll watching, which I think is a good thing. But we also want to make sure our poll workers are protected. And so what Section 17 does is add some language to the existing violation of interfering with poll officers, just clarifying that anyone who threatens force or violence in a manner that would prevent a reasonable poll officer from executing his or her duties, who materially interrupts or improperly interferes with the execution of their duties, or acts in any other manner to intimidate, shall be guilty of a felony. And we use the same definition of intimidate as used in current law for intimidation of a voter. So we're just trying to kind of make that same, that use that same existing language. Yeah.
So section 19 is giving original jurisdiction to the GBI for any elections issues and giving them the authority to subpoena any and all records, whether it be material or electronic. And I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm sure Mr. Germany is also happy to take any questions from the committee.
All right. Mr. Representative Powell, is that you?
Yeah, that's me.
All right.
I want to thank y'all. This is an issue that's been of keen interest to me. This issue of chain of custody was identified by one of my constituents. She had been a poll watcher, and strange enough, after all the stuff we went through with the Election Integrity Act last year, she identified this chain of custody was a failure, that we did not have that. House Bill 886 was passed early in the session. Now the Government Affairs Committee dealt with all of that. And I'm looking through here, and I think that almost most all of that language has been included in this, except there's one that I'm missing, unless it's buried in here and I can't find it. One of the areas of chain of custody dealt with the election paper, or the election unmarked ballots as it's sent. Because I'd met with several of the election superintendents that were trying to figure out what they could do with the chain of custody. And I basically told them, most of them all told me that when the raw election paper, the security paper comes in, that it's put in a locker of some sort. And I said, well, that's where you would put your chain. Is that in here? Did y'all take that into this substitute for the election security paper?
That part is not in here, and that was based on conversations with county election directors, basically saying, hey, here's how we treat that. Similar to what you said, it's in a secure location. But I think they felt that tracking all of that the whole time, especially when it's blank, would be very burdensome, and frankly wouldn't actually secure what we need to, which is actually voted ballots, the ballots that are counting. So that part is not in here.
And that came from a consensus of the county election superintendents.
I talked to the county, superintendent is the election board. The people that really do the work are the elections directors day to day. So that's usually who I talk to say, okay, what is this going to mean for you day to day? Are we adding something here, or are we, actually hurting something? And so there's a few that I talk to who I think are some of the strongest ones in the state, and we do have a lot of good ones. who I think felt that would actually subtract from them completing their duties in a secure and also timely way.
With your knowledge of the elections, and I'm willing to hear what you're saying on that, is there anywhere that secured paper ballots, the unmarked ballots? 'Cause I know that I talked to several of the elections superintendents and polling officials around the state. They didn't think much of that because they said, well, this comes in bundles and we're going to have to count off the sheets individually and keep up with that. So would you think that at any point of that process, that if there's no chain of custody, is there any failure or any fault that could be given that paper could be used for any other purpose?
Well, I think there is chain of custody. I think it's just not exactly in the way that you had spelled out, in the initial bill. And I think I think that's one thing, just to clarify, that I do think there were chain of custody procedures already existing, and this bill and your bill kind of identify what some of those are and actually put them in law, which is a good thing.
All right.
When you think about what those blank ballots are used for, we basically have two kind of types of ballots. There's the blank paper that goes to a polling place that's going to be printed out of a printer and scanned into a polling place. And then there's absentee ballots. And blank absentee ballots are, in addition to being, sent to voters to actually vote them, they're also sent to polling places to use as emergency and provisional ballots. And when you send them to a polling place, you do track how many you send and then how many are voted and how many are returned.
So there's a chain of custody on the absentee, blank absentees,
Yes, sir.
as well as the marked absentees.
Correct.
All right. If I might ask, I just kind of want to go through this because this is of a keen interest to me. On 13, that section, I'm presuming, deals with the drop box chain of custody for ballots picked up out of the drop boxes. That would be, it's on page 13, and then I've got it starting on line 103.
Yes, sir.
That deals with the Dropbox chain of custody.
Yes, sir.
I know that had been somewhat of an issue that had been raised from some of the smaller counties that said that they didn't see a need to it, since in those counties, they may only be walking a minimum of just a few feet to take them in. But then we've got other precincts. So that was put back in and retained.
Yes, sir.
Section 8 deals with the absentee chain of custody.
Correct.
Line 477. This would be the ballots then scanned. That's the chain of custody on scanned ballots.
Correct. That's when, at the conclusion of the process, so the ballot is scanned. At that point, it is put in a sealed container with a numbered seal. They of course would be gotten back out for an audit or a recount. But when they're done being scanned, then they are put in a sealed container with a numbered seal.
On line 523, this section deals with the chain of custody for absentee ballots.
Correct.
Line starting on line 564, dealt with any challenged ballots. That's a chain of custody on challenged ballots.
Correct.
It skips to section 11 on page 30. That's the deals with the provisional ballots chain of custody.
Yes, sir.
And on section 12, it deals with the closing the ballots and how they're handled with the chain of custody at the close of the ballots.
Yeah, they close the voting in the polling place. Yes, sir.
Right. I want to thank y'all for integrating the language at 886 into this bill. Do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Representative Alexander.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at section 52 through 63 on page 3 and 98 through 111 on page 5, where it's talking about gifts and donations. I'm just trying to understand this process. With the 159 counties, the election office is going to travel to Atlanta to meet with the state election board. What is that process? What is that going to look like? Are they going to give them, are they going to approve it by email, by letter? How is that going to work? And then if it's not approved, then what is that process?
I think it's not the county elections board who would be asking for approval. It'd be the person who wants to give the gift or grant or donation. They would have to ask the state election board for approval. And the state election board would then determine, the law says, it says they make sure the donation serves the electors of Georgia and does not offer any partisan advantage. And they shall develop processes to ensure, the state election board shall develop processes to ensure the fair and equitable distribution of such grants. And I think the idea is just to make sure that because we're a large state, and we want to make sure that to the extent there's gifts or grants that are meant to help, that we can ensure they're actually helping the process and not something that can be construed later as someone trying to get a partisan advantage on something.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. In section 14, how long after election day will the unsealed ballots be available for the public to review?
I don't think this changes the current law where it says they're kept in the under seal at Superior Court for 2 years following the election, for 24 months.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's on line 884.
Sorry. Anybody else have questions? Chairman Blackman.
I did have, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I did have a question about some language that was in the latest sub for 933 that I believe you've included, Mr. Chairman. And just out of curiosity, if it was, if there was a update to be considered, that maybe I submit that to you. I think it encompasses a little more input and simplifies kind of a minimalistic way. That's how we've done this, presented that and talked about it in governmental affairs a couple of times, but I can get with you offline if that's okay, Mr. Chairman, or there may be some explanation as to the verbiage that's in there now.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, let's probably talk about that. I take it it's different in the bill sub that we're looking at now than what you did before or what you have now?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a problem with not securing that, the special paper. I really do. What we've got to do is we've got to reestablish confidence in our elections and our procedures. And I think it's going to take securing that security paper. Otherwise, the accusations of counterfeit security paper, selling security paper walking out, I think that undermines some of the confidence that we've got to put back into our elections. And I have a real problem with that. I just wanted to express that.
Well, I would just say it's not that there's no security of the security paper, because there is, and there's some local election officials here who I think can speak to how they secure that paper in their offices.
No, I understand, having been in elections, I understand how that is done. But there again, the perception of the public to elections and how they're conducted, we've got to make some accountability, and we've got to just make sure that we assure the public that everything is secure. And we've got to start with the paper that is being used, that it can't be duplicated. You know, they can put a serial number on every dollar bill, every whatever. Dollar bill, $5 bill, whatever. So we could go to, maybe, I know that would be very expensive, but there's a lot of things that I have in mind, but you know, securing that security paper, I think is a utmost concern to me, but I just need to make that known. Thank you.
Chairman Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies to you and the committee and the presenters. I was in Ways and Means. We get pulled a bit, I'm sure. If I can, just to direct this to the gentleman presenting, we'll look for the elections folks to come forward. I agree with Representative Williams. I mean, the U.S. currency is one of the most hard to counterfeit currencies in the world, to my knowledge. We're one of the only few people that our bills are the same size. Most people change the size of the bills because of the denomination of the bill, because they can't keep them from being washed and counterfeited and so forth. And that starts with the paper they're printed on. That's the most, I mean, there's of course ink and there's things that go in the paper, but I understand that the difficulty with doing that. But I do believe that a close accounting of that is something that's necessary. I mean, I'm assuming this comes in reams of 500 sheets or something thereabouts, like everything else. And if those are broken all over the state in 10,000 different precincts and you know, times 500, that's just a lot of leakage that could happen. So I understand that's difficult, but I agree with the gentleman. And just want to point out, I know it's a hard thing to do, but hard things are important sometimes for us to pay attention to. So I'd love to work with you to try to find a way. That's important.
Well, I would just say, I think there's drastically less counterfeiting. In fact, we've seen evidence of none in terms of looking at actual ballots. Now, when you look at money, there is some. So that's frankly not the standard that we should look to in elections.
No, and I didn't mean to draw if I did a bad job verbalizing that. My point was was not the same level necessarily, but my point was the thing that made currency the hardest to counterfeit was the paper, was the base paper it started on. And I was just trying to make a point to make a paper ballot hardest to counterfeit would be control of what you write the paper on, not that it took the same level of protection, but that the base paper was what the United States government relies on as a.
But I think the point I'm trying to make is I think there's actually better ways than that in elections, because in elections they have managed to have much less counterfeiting than in dollars, and that's something we investigated in Georgia and it found none. And so I do think the election officials will be helpful in terms of how they here's the process that they currently use, and if there's improvements to that, they're open to it. But I want to make sure, you know, we don't take a process that's working and then somehow throw a wrench in it. That's my main concern.
Happy to work with you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On lines 785 and 786 on page 31, on the denominator language, can you walk through a little bit why that was challenging? And is there a time, I recognize maybe 10 p.m. may be a challenge on the day of votes, but is there a time, whether it's midnight or otherwise, that might be able to be implemented?
Well, I guess on the second, to answer the second part first, you know, by midnight, you should have for election day votes, both the denominator and the actual
Sure,
breakdown.
should.
So, and that's what we found, is we were actually pulling away from getting actual results uploaded. It's going to have, you know, more information than just a denominator. The reason I think it was hard is for counties election officials is because they had to get that information from each polling place And the counties want to do some, we found they wanted to do some kind of quality checks on the numbers they were getting from their poll managers before they posted it publicly. And that's because, I think they are careful about what information is made public. And remember, poll workers, including poll managers, are people that, come do this a few times a year. And so they wanted to have that extra level of kind of check on that number before it went out. And that was really what slowed it down. Whereas absentee, that happens in the county elections office. They're checking it every day. And then, on election day, they're just adding in the ones that come in on election day. So I think that's very doable. And, hopefully by close to 10 p.m., we have not only the denominator, but also, the actual results breakdown of all these, of each type of vote, with early scanning that's in SB 202, and with, getting the results in from election day, because that's really the best, is have it completely done. But the denominator is there for absentee to make sure, okay, it's really there to say, here's how many came in, to kind of go to the point of, sometimes you hear, oh, they just keep counting until there's enough ballots. Well, this wants to make sure, okay, here's the number. It's not going to be more than that.
Do you think if there might be potential language saying if the results aren't ready by midnight, that you would have to have day of denominator as well, or something to that effect? Just something to think.
I mean, I just think
through.
the best thing is let's get those election day results in as quickly as
Oh,
possible.
absolutely. I'm just saying if it's not ready by midnight or whatever the number is, or hour is, maybe continue to have that denominator language, just something maybe we could consider. Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thanks, sir. In the previous version, I don't know where it is now, but in the previous version on line 330, it referred to the word poll official. And, do we need to go back to poll manager? Where is that on this revised? Do you know? It's in the chain of custody. But is there a way to, I don't know where it is in this new.
What's the complete, can you give me a little more context what you're looking at?
Yeah, it was on the former thing, version. It was line 330. Want to consider substituting the word poll official for the word poll manager. Using the word manager will severely restrict process that is conducted simultaneously by many individuals. So
I'll come look at what you're looking at.
okay, well, we'll maybe get off with it offline, but don't want to restrict it to poll manager when they're having to oversee everything, and to make sure that this poll official can carry out some of the other duties.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chairman Martin.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, again, I apologize about getting here in the midst of the meeting and hadn't had a chance to look through this sub completely, but I know we had talked and I wanted, this is troubling a little bit to the county in which I live now, but I think it works on all 159 counties. I'm advised by some citizens that follow the election process, long before 2020 happened, and they'll do it long since. They're just very interested in doing that. And it's come to my attention that our Board of Elections has, in their infinite wisdom, decided they won't take any public comment at their meetings. And I find that to be a little objectionable, quite frankly. I would leave it to them to decide, how much with, a minimum amount of an hour at a meeting, and certainly let them manage the decorum at their meeting. But I'd like very much and I think it would be good that we would require that these, appointed members that are working for the public do listen to the public. And leave it to them to decide the duration of each speaker, and again, handle the decorum. But I just wanted to sound it before this committee and those in the audience that I do think it incumbent upon appointed people that are dealing with things as important as elections, that they listen to the public in whatever manner, again, that they prescribe for their meeting, but that they do not cut off public comment entirely. I think that's just, quite frankly, as an elected official, I find that objectionable that any public servant would do that. I thank the gentleman for allowing me to do that. I'll get you amendment language if it has not made it in the bill as yet.
All right, thank you. Anybody else with a question? All right, gentlemen, thank you. All right, we have that mic active there. We've got several people that want to speak on the bill. Call on Stephanie Ali. Stephanie Ali. She had to leave. Oh, okay. Next is James Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I begin, I wanted to just read a message from Stephanie. She had to leave to pick up her son. But Stephanie Ali is with the New Georgia Project and was planning to speak, but the unexpected delay had conflict with childcare. And so she asked me to notify you and the rest of the committee that they will send an official comment via email and request that those comments be afforded meaningful consideration prior to passage. It be officially incorporated into the record. But good afternoon. My name is James Woodall. I'm a policy associate at the Southern Center for Human Rights. And before I begin, I also want to just thank the sponsor for bringing this bill. We are neutral at the Southern Center for Human Rights on this bill. There are some provisions within it that we believe does help clean up the language in the statute around Senate Bill 202 from last year. And then, of course, there are some that we are concerned about. And so I want to go specifically line by line of the issues that we have, as well as some of the, the high level points that we have that we are grateful for. One is line 61 as relates to the intent of the donor. If persons are willing to give directly to partisan purposes, they can give directly to political parties as opposed to local boards of election. We think that boards of election are integrous and they have a character, and they're operating in the best interest of the voters. And so if a donor wants to give directly to a local board of election, they should be able to do so without any third party interference. And so we're concerned about that. Secondly is on lines 83 and 84, the appointment of local members of county boards of election and boards of election within investigations. We are happy to see that local boards of election who are under investigation, those members are not a part of an investigation panel. That just defeats the purpose of having an investigation altogether. We are concerned also with lines 118 and 119, which outlines the number of machines. We've seen I think it's about 3 times now that number continues to decrease for one reason or another, that we want to maintain that 250 per machine ratio. I think that is consistent with what we've seen work.
You understand that the 250 stays in place, but it's the total number left over after early voting. So it reduces the number of machines that might be needed to be prepped.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. However, with the number changing from early vote to the general election, that would still essentially disenfranchise certain persons when it comes to longer lines and those kind of things. And we are aware that there are some provisions within the bill that tries to address that. But just the decrease of that number, just in general terms, would be a concern for us.
You mean the number of the machines?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
On lines 185 through 188, the sending of ballot applications by non-government organizations, there was some concern that, there was some gratitude that is kind of cleaned up to make sure that, persons are clear. When we were sending out, well, not the Southern Center, but when I was at the NAACP, we would send out ballot applications routinely. And we want people to be very clear that we're not operating on behalf of the state, but we are hoping and we're wishing that people can participate. So anything that we can do to make the process even more efficient would be helpful. On lines 226 through 228, the cleaning up of allowing relatives to mail absentee ballots, of course, there was some disparity between what was in 202 and what was actually happening in practice. And so cleaning that up would be helpful. So we're not criminalizing people who want to help their family members participate in the elections process. Yes, sir. On lines 226 through 228. On lines 585 through 586, the necessary time off for persons to vote. As we know, not a lot of people get the opportunity to get time off to vote, and the encouragement there is helpful. So thank you for that. On line 741, I would ask that there be a small amendment. And we've asked a few persons and there has not been any one way on this one, but amending that part on line 741 to add equal to the term partisan balance, because I know there was some cleanup language that talked about persons who are actually on the ballot. So entities that have candidates on the ballot be represented within the poll watchers. And so just to add the term equal to partisan balance, just to make sure it's an equal number of persons who are watching. The last part I would mention is the last section around the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Attorney General, and just quite frankly, the lack of resources that public defenders have. And so we have subpoenas that are being sent out, for whatever reason, and they're having to be, for whatever reason, a prosecution of sorts, that we would ask that if the Attorney General and thus, the Georgia Bureau of Investigations are getting additional appropriation for this, that the equal measure be given to the Georgia Public Defenders Council. With that, I'll conclude my remarks.
Chairman Martin.
Just a brief question. I appreciate, I think you testified before us last year. I appreciate the professionalism you use when you do that. And this is a bit of a recursive question I'm going to ask you, and then I'm going to ask you to get with me and help me work on it. Because when you talk about in this section about third parties, giving the money, into the, I think it's early, and I think 61 through 63, you were talking about the intent of the donor. That in 61 through 63.
61, yes, sir.
Yeah. You were talking about the intent of the donor, and that, the election board should be above reproach and the intent of the donor, and you didn't want a third party to interfere. That's the difficulty we have, because a third party, some people view the third party giving the money as interference. And that's why we're trying to help kind of level that out. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, Mr. Chairman. And how I would respond to it is when we saw millions of dollars, invested in Georgia in the last election cycle, it wasn't just the election administration. It was also, we saw candidates, we saw, political parties. And so to suggest, or not suggest, excuse me, with the implication that when persons give to a local board of election, that it is for a partisan advantage purpose, I don't think that is reflective of actually what took place. Several counties are still struggling to this day to make do with the new changes, with the resources that they have. And if I'm, say for instance, and Lord knows I'm not, but if I am a multi-million-dollar person and I want to give to Georgia's counties, and I see Fulton County is struggling to support the work that it needs to do to handle elections, then I would be willing to do that. And so if I'm giving, resources directly to a particular purpose, I think the intent should be honored.
Well,
if it's not illegal.
If I can follow up, and again, that's where I think the eye of the intent is a bit in the beholder. I would argue, and I value the opportunity to talk about it further, but in meetings I've been in all summer, we saw where single donors that did have hundreds of millions of dollars just so happened to give that money in counties where there was a huge partisan advantage, and they all seemed to be the same way. So people on the other side of that felt like it was toward, they felt like it was partisan. If one is giving money to get out the vote, but you're giving it in counties that are 70-30 partisan one way or the other, it seems a bit partisan. If you're going to give money to get out the vote, it should be spread kind of equal in a partisan manner. We love to
We can-
talk,
I'll-
love
yeah.
to talk to you further about it, but the point I wanted to make is by definition, if a third party is bringing money to an election board, that's a third party, some would say interfering with the process. And then you had just said at the end of your comments, we don't want a third party interfering with that. So you sort of build on when does the third party interference, when's it good, when it's bad, and that's in the eye of the beholder.
And
But
I'll
I-
reach out, Chairman, and we can talk about this. The only thing I'll mention in closing is that when I think about the entity that oversees that, it is a partisan board. And so it makes it where I hear you that the partisan advantage is of concern, but when you have a 3-1 split on the state election board, I mean, we're nonprofit, so I don't go one way or the other when it comes to the work that we do. But when you have a partisan board, which is quasi judicial, making those determinations is to say, hey, if a person is given, has an intent to give to a specific county, that should be honored.
So the last thing, Mr. Chairman, so it's that board is a 3-1 partisan board, but you don't trust them to be nonpartisan. But an elections board that may be a 3-2 partisan board, we do trust to be nonpartisan.
Well-
You see my quandary. We're not going to solve it this afternoon, but the truth is we need all of those boards to have an angel on their shoulder.
I agree.
Do we not?
I
And
agree.
we need to build back to that. And I hope we can do that with you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Always professional.
Anybody else? You have anything further?
Nope, that's all. Thank you,
All right,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you. All right, next on the list, I cannot read the last name, but the first name is Bentley. All right, come ahead. All right, tell us your name.
Of course. Hey, y'all. My name is Bentley Hudgens. I look like this because I just came off the doors knocking into DeKalb County. My team and I have already knocked 5,000 doors in my district. And one of the number one concerns that people in DeKalb County have was barriers to their right to vote. There are common sense solutions to strengthen our elections, making it easy to vote and hard to cheat. This bill does not effectively address the real problems presented by the electorate. Over the years working in election protection, I saw firsthand that election workers already do not have what they need to successfully administer elections. In 2020, out in the summer, I was running all around Park Tavern, making sure that people had what they needed to stay out of the summer thunderstorms because they were waiting in hours-long lines. One analysis shows, specifically, they don't have what they need on training and resources. Election workers didn't even know how to work the machines. One analysis shows that this bill would have reduced the donations received by counties like DeKalb in 2020 to just $272,000. This represents a 95% or greater reduction in funding for large counties like Fulton, DeKalb, Cobb, and Gwinnett, while smaller counties would retain nearly all of their 2020 donations. So we've noted multiple times, both from speakers here and from those of you who are serving our public, that county election boards don't have what they need to administer elections. Why isn't the state itself providing the funding needed to administer elections? Why are we leaving donations on the table? Wouldn't this disproportionately impact Black, Brown, AAPI, and disabled voters in Georgia? Each county has unique election needs. Why are you making it harder for local bodies to meet local needs? Why are we making it harder for communities to help their neighbors stay in line, no matter who they vote for? Why are we creating a longer process? Look, I understand the need to make sure that election workers are safe and secure. My life was threatened. My apartment was trying to break, we had an attempted break-in. So I appreciate the provision to help address the security concerns of election workers. But this bill gives the GBI new unlimited subpoena power over elections, which would lead to intimidation of voters, counties, election workers who would be forced to comply or be litigated. This could undermine and stall elections with frivolous subpoenas during election season. This could expose sensitive voter information through the subpoena process. I already know what that's like to have people who are bad actors to have your personal information and then threaten you with that information. Look, there are some portions of this bill that are good, but the large swath of provisions of this omnibus represents an authoritarian power grab full of unfunded mandates to subvert the will of Georgia voters and undermine the basic right to a free and fair democracy and the confidence in elections that some of you have needed, that some of you have noted that is so sorely needed. Thank you for your time.
All right, I have no questions. Thank you. Joel Nat. Mr. Nat, if you prefer to sit.
I'll stand up.
Okay. All right.
There will be 30 seconds.
Standing's not the problem, it's walking. Good afternoon. I want to thank you all. I testified actually last year on the House bill that became 202, and I want to thank you for everything that you guys did. My name is Joel Nat. I'm from Forsyth County, Georgia. I am the vice chairman of the Board of Elections in Forsyth County. First and foremost, as several of you will remember from last year, I'm thankful for the inclusion in this one in section, 1 second here, sorry. In section 9, the 404 changes. I believe that will help immensely voters across the state, especially in this time where we have labor shortages, to limit the ability to get just 2 hours at the start of a workday or at the end of a workday on election day sort of limits employer balance of their workforce. So I'm very happy to see that in there, and I can't thank you all enough for including it. The next thing I want to talk to was section 4 of your bill. So it's 21-2-364 in your, and as an election person, I can't applaud you enough for helping us a little with that. We have limited space at a poll on election day. We have to have to deploy one machine or one station. Actually, now it's not just a machine, it's the touch screen, the printer, the box that goes around it to ensure privacy for every 250 voters in a precinct. Makes it more difficult to find adequate space, adequate power supplies, and other things to allow us in the bill to reduce the number of machines, and give us space and all to account for those that have already voted. It improves the overall experience for voters in general. Doesn't mean we have to reduce the number of machines. It's just giving us the power makes it a little bit better in certain locations. I can tell you in Forsyth County, we have some precincts that will deploy the number of machines we're required, and they'll start the day 0, they'll end the day 0. We can't, it's just how it is because 60% of that precinct may have voted early. So it definitely helps us from a equipment need, equipment preparation, and equipment deployment. So I can't applaud you enough, and I can't thank you enough for that. The next item I want to talk about is a general item, and it goes to something that was a discussion back and forth here about securing paper. Professionally, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I do data privacy, I do information security. And we have a term in our industry called bad actors. And only when I'm talking about bad actor as a cyber person, talk about a hacker or cyber criminal, most likely in Eastern Europe. But we are all bad actors to some extent. And I hate to say it that way, that you all find representatives are bad actors and everything, and even I. And we have this problem in general with it. And we have to think about it. You were talking about securing paper. There's 2 types of paper we use in elections. We use paper that the state has contracted for the in-person voting. It's a ream of paper. It's a grayish color right now, but it could theoretically turn to blue or pink or whatever. But it's a paper. It has nothing of value on it until it's printed with your ballot. Until you go and hit cast vote, it comes out of the printer and you take it over to the machine and drop it in the scanner that scans it. It has no value. To put a security count on that paper would be a waste of resources, time, and energy, with all due respect, Representative. But on the other side of the coin, the piece that does matter is those pre-printed absentee ballots. That is a pseudo active ballot. It's not active because it hasn't been sent out to a voter. It's sitting in our warehouses. We do chain of custody when it leaves our building and goes out to a precinct as those emergency ballots or those provisional ballots, as the case may be. And we do chain of custody while it's out there, that we know if it's deployed or not, or if we have to send more out there from an inventory control perspective. Those might be the ones that Representative, that you all would be more concerned about from a bad actor perspective. The other piece of thinking about bad actor is the ability of audit. You talk about, we have to count everything. Everything's counted, recounted, double counted, triple counted. And that piece comes in to these drop boxes to an extent. Once I take a ballot, or my poll workers take a ballot out of there, they start the count process. We know we report we took 50 out, but we really don't know if there were 50 in there to start with. And while I honestly believe every person that works for my director and my staff is a good person, I can't say that for certain. I can't say that they didn't unintentionally drop one, have one fly away just in an accident. And there's no way to know that they took all that were out of there, because there's no starting chain of custody when I put one in there. There's no metric to say 50 or 100 were dropped in. And so without that piece, that actual piece to know how many I should be taking out of it, I can't tell you, because I do know that on the in-person voting, I do know how many ballots were cast. The machine counts and clicks every time a ballot is processed. So I have a number. I have that record. So it's important to, and I know it's not, there's no way to find it in this bill, but as you look forward, think about that piece too. If these are to be part of our system, we need that piece. We need to know how much we should be taking out that we're turning in on a daily basis. Those are important. The last item I want to point to was we were talking about funding and clearing it through the state board, and I'm a big fan of that to an extent. But I want to point out my board, we're 5 members. I've been privileged to serve since 2015. I'm what I would call the ranking Republican on it by tenure. We have 2 Democrats and another Republican, and we have a nonpartisan. That's how several of the other counties throughout the state are. But not all 159 are the same. There are counties that have boards that are comprised of 1 Republican, 1 Democrat, someone that's a friend of the county commission chair, someone that's part of, with all due respect to you all, the county delegation. So partisanship does come into play a lot harder when the parties don't get equal appointment and control. So if I was to be looking at that, and I would be uniforming across the state, all the boards, make us all the same. Have X amount of Republican appointees, X amount of Democratic appointees, X amount of nonpartisan appointees. Make it equal. If that's the only way to ensure equality, is to have equal representation on that. Those are just the highlights. I can't thank you enough for the hard work you guys have done over the last 2 years. I know last year it was Barry Fleming that was the chairman, and now it's you, sir. But those are important. I did have one last comment, if I may. It was mentioned about public comment. In Forsyth County, we take public comment. But how our public comment works is when we publish our agenda, we put a little note next to it that says, these are just agenda items that we will take public comment on. And when we get to that agenda item, we open the floor to public comment for everybody that has submitted their names, just like I submitted my name today to speak to you all. And if you are going to put something into this bill about public comment, think about it in that manner versus just coming and having public comment. Oh, I want to speak about this or I want to speak about that. We don't control everything that happens in elections. I can't control, and I've heard it, the ERIC system. The ERIC is in the statute. I follow it. I can't say my opinions on this new Jarvis system. That comes down to me versus ENET. I can't do any of those pieces or parts, but I can say, I can take public comment on where I'm going to put a precinct. I can take public comment on how I'm going to do this or do that. And that's where, the agenda control and opening it up needs to consideration. It just needs to be fair and equitable again. I hope I covered everything. I appreciate your time today and thanking me for coming and being a little patient with my ankle.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Mr. Nat. Do have a question, Chairman Martin?
Yeah, thank you. And to be clear, what you said about your agenda, and if I wasn't clear before, the time, manner, and dealing with the comments, I would leave open to your position and your board members.
Right.
I just think there should be some, to verify that again, maybe it should be, not less than this much time, but leave that to your prescription. I absolutely, and the decorum, which would go into what they could. So we're on the same page here. I did want to ask you one question though, because and I value again the back and forth, because I look at it all as constructive. The reason I believe that one has to be careful and agree with Representative Williams on the security paper is you said that it's not a vote until it's a vote. I agree with you, but you also then said we got to secure the absentee ballots, because even blank absentee ballots have started the process.
That's correct.
Make no mistake, if one has security paper, one can print blank absentee ballots.
That's correct.
Okay, so well, just let me finish the premise of the question. No, it's fine, but because I value your input. You handle this all the time, right? I want to understand that. But if you can get that security paper, and then any HP printer can lay that absentee ballot over you, you can create votes. If we control the security paper, it's harder to do that. So, help me work with you on how we control that process.
Okay. So
the tough thing we have that we can't do with money is we can't put anything on that ballot that identifies that could potentially be tracked back to the voter, because that's just straight up unconstitutional.
Well,
so that's the reason I mentioned the paper was important.
Yeah. No, and if I can address your point for a moment, Mr. Chairman,
Absolutely.
A blank sheet of paper, and this isn't a perfectly blank, but a blank sheet of paper is nothing more than a blank sheet of paper, whether it's special paper or plain paper. And yes, you're absolutely right. I can throw it into an HP printer and I can print out what I need on it. To some extent, though, still, when I print out an in-person ballot, until it is read by the Dropbox and thus deposited into a locked, secured cabinet that has a tracking number of how many it has received, that has to map back when I take the total number of ballots cast in machine A and machine B, so tie it back to what my poll pad says has checked in and been issued a ballot. I should always balance there. And assuming the balancing is occurring, that paper, if I get a handful of whatever paper they get from Georgia Pacific or whoever the paper supplier is, it hasn't been through those other pieces. The poll staff it wouldn't have been there. The absentee ballot, on the other hand, is printed by a third-party company, delivered to us, and then we transmit it out to our voters. Those pieces of paper have a ballot on it that, through the process, through everything else, is where you need that level of security that you're talking about, because that blank paper could wander out and suddenly wander back in, and there is no check of an in-person voter. Does that make sense to you, Representative?
Well, yeah, I think we're saying the same thing then, because then it is important. Because if a bad, is it not true that if a bad actor wanted to get some of that security paper, create an absentee ballot, if they then somehow intercepted, for instance, there were people that were dropping things in drop boxes that we appear to see on pictures that they weren't supposed to. You know, I don't know how many times it happened, but you know, one, if they went and picked them up and they had the security paper where they didn't like what they picked up and they colored it in, filled out the rest of the name and put them in there. I'm just saying, when you can get what is,
I follow
is
what
the
you're
real,
saying.
you follow it. So, I mean, we may not be able to get rid of everything, but that's why
That would be
the
be-
base security paper is what you have to have to create an improper and some would call it fraudulent ballot.
To that, and knowing, and because of stuff I've done in my career, that would be really for the state to control back when we printed it back at our general printing point and all that type of paper control. It would be something for the precinct or the poll or the county to be, it would be something we receive at that point. And it would just be a matter of checks and balances that we received and certified we received 10,000 to start with, and then how we handled those 10,000, what's remaining at the end, I think.
And if I can just make one, ask this and ask you if you agree, and I know the committee's ready to move on. I think you again bring up something that I'd like to see. When we send out paper, the security paper that can be used for in-person voting that day, we need to send it out, and it needs to be different than the paper that can be an absentee ballot.
It currently is.
Is the security paper itself required to be different?
The paper that is sent to the precincts,
right,
is different from the paper sent out on an absentee ballot because of the stock type and weight and other things. So
with the security paper now too. Okay.
well, that would be something you would have to add into the
Okay,
statute.
that's what I mean, I knew it was, different. Okay.
Yeah.
I believe that's all the questions. Thank you, Mr. Nat.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right, before we move on, I'm an old retired judge, and I went to the bathroom and got a little something to eat before I got up here, so I can go a long time. And we're going to start getting into late hours. How many of y'all that have signed up to speak cannot come back here tomorrow? Okay, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, all right. I think I can give you, let's just say 5 minutes each. 3. All right, 3. I'll go 3. Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay, if you want to do that. Seriously, I mean, we're doing it 3 minutes at a time. It shouldn't take that long. No. Not being that. It's a good idea.
Can we just go ahead?
Okay, well, we're
Mine will be
different,
real
different year,
short.
different bill now, so, okay. All right, sir, if you would tell us your name so I can check you off here.
Yes, Ray Smith. Good afternoon. I've been an attorney in this state for 34 years, and I've also been a statewide poll watcher for the same amount of time. I've litigated election contests, and I want to speak on behalf of the bill. I think the bill is a very nice complement to SB 202. But I do, the particular provisions that I'm interested in are the protections for lawyers and for poll workers and poll volunteers. I think that's very important.
You know, the pendulum seems to swing back and forth in the state from partisan, you know, in 2018, you had a bunch of Democrats, lawyers and poll workers that were challenging the results. In 2020, you have a bunch of Republicans challenging results. Who knows what's going to happen in 2022 or 2024 or in the future? But both sides should be protected, and both sides should have the right to challenge the integrity of the election process during that process. And so I wholly hope that you will keep that provision in the bill, or provisions in the bill, where you protect those who want to help those who want to challenge results. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Marcy McCarthy. I'm the chairman of the DeKalb Republican Party, and I'm also a part of the Election Integrity Competence Task Force. I want to bring up just a couple of things with you. Line 277 in the bill and 279, to change the language from on the drop boxes to be from being closed to actually locked when they're not being used. Closed is a little bit too vague. Locked, these are containing ballots, so we feel that they should be locked and specified in the code, because closed is a little bit ambiguous. I would also like to encourage you to add some additional language to the bill around, I'm just going to read it to you because we've crafted it and we can submit this to you. But this is around the drop boxes again, in the same section. Notwithstanding any state law to contrary, Dropbox locations must use a video recording device to monitor and secure each Dropbox regardless of the location. The video recording device shall be placed where there is adequate lighting and where the faces of each person using the Dropbox is visible. Our county shall provide live web access to all Dropbox recordings at no cost to citizens. So basically you have a citizen action task force watching those Dropboxes 24 hours a day, 7 days, well, during the entire voting period. All video footage shall be retained for a time period of at least 4 years, or shall the conclusion of any contest involving an election on the ballot in the county jurisdiction, whichever is later, and shall be made available to the office of the Secretary of State at the conclusion of each election voting period. I cannot stress the fact that the drop boxes themselves, now codified, are the weakest link in our election system in Georgia. So we need to ensure that there's fitness, faith, integrity, and trust in our elections, because many of us have lost faith in our elections in the 2020 elections. I know all of you have worked tirelessly to improve that, but the Dropbox component needs to have 24/7 video access. One thing is, it's in there about the surveillance by an election worker or an officer, but it needs to go a step further and be recorded overall. Do you have any questions?
Just trying to get you to wrap up.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, for allowing us to have some public comments. My name is Alice Olenek. I'm the current chairman of the Board of Registrations and Elections in Gwinnett County. I think we're the second largest voting group in the state of Georgia. I'm here today as a citizen of Georgia. I'm not speaking on behalf of the board. And I'd like to talk to you about the drop boxes. As Marcy McCarthy said, that is our weakest link that we have right now with securing our election. We need to have videos. Last time we had videos, and I seriously doubt, I know I asked specifically to look at the videos in Gwinnett County, and I was never offered that opportunity. So they need to be monitored by video, and they need to have those videos actually watched. Right now, the drop boxes, in my opinion, we have 1800s technology, metal box with a slot in it sitting in a corner somewhere in the 21st century when technology is much better. We have no, as Mr. Nat noted, we have no way of noting how many ballots are dropped into that box. We only know how many ballots are taken out of the box. You can trust your poll workers. They are sworn workers, but if they fall on the floor and a couple go underneath the box, it could take till after the election till we find out that they're back there. We are not bolting the boxes onto the floor of the facility that we're using for advanced in-person voting. So maybe they could be moved or not moved. I mean, we really need to secure those boxes. Technology is out there that ballot drop boxes act like ATM machines. You put your ID in, it lets you drop one ballot in at a time. It time and date stamps the ballot, so you know what time, date, and it actually can give a receipt to the voter. I know there's no way that there's time to do that, but that's something for the future for this committee to think of, so that we definitely can secure the ballot. In fact, some of that technology can take the image of the ID and they know who actually dropped that ballot envelope
Any
into
idea on cost?
Last year, I looked this up when I was working on the integrity committee. They're about $55,000 a box. They might be more now, supply chain, chips, whatever. Also,
You have
when we
about a
were
minute
talking,
left.
when we were talking about security of the paper, I totally agree. In Gwinnett County, we have the only county in the state of Georgia where we have 2 languages. So we have to do all our printing by an outside vendor on our own, and we have to supply our own paper. So if there's any way that you all can help us financially with that, it would be greatly appreciated. We also need some language to help the poll workers. If someone who's ever watching, or a security officer that's watching the ballot box, if someone comes in with a large stack of ballots, once they're dropped in the box, there's no way of knowing which ones shouldn't be in there and which ones should. We should have some type of language that the poll manager, assistant manager, poll worker could approach that person and find out at least the ID of the person that dropped in several different ballots. And it might be absolutely fine and nothing nefarious, because according to the law, you have grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, etc. And just to make sure that the person dropping those had legally put them into that box.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
that's it. If you have any questions, call me. I'll give you my phone number. I've been working elections for 10 years, so I can fill you in on almost everything.
Okay,
So,
thank you very much.
thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for your work, your hard work. My name is Pamela Reardon, and I am managing the election task force right now currently in Cobb County. We have a special election coming up, and the advanced voting starts on Monday. One of the things I did last week when I'm training our poll watchers is we went through what the poll watchers are doing in the polls, obviously, right? One of the things now is they have to keep their eye on the drop boxes. So one of the questions is, and I took this up with Janine Evler, who is the rock star supervisor. She got an award last year for the county, for their supervising the Board of Elections. And I asked her, I says, well, what's going to happen when my poll watcher sees somebody come in with 150 ballots and, you can tell whatever the number is, right? More than their own ballot. And what's going to happen? Can that poll watcher go and tell the manager, hey, look, now, but there's nothing in this law, which we need in this law, like Alice alluded to. What's going to happen? I mean, we have this law. It's a felony to bring in any other ballots than what you can, you're authorized to. If you're a caregiver, your grandma, your whatever, and your brother and sister, if they can't make it, and your ballot, that's a sacred ballot. So it's a felony. So there has to be something now in this bill, some language that the poll manager can go to that person and say, how many ballots did you bring and who did you bring? I mean, that's just a common sense thing. The other thing is right now, I don't know if you know, but SB 202 last year took the Secretary of State off the State Board of Elections. So for one full year, we have had no chair at the State Board of Elections. And the problem is the way the law was written, it has to be someone who's nonpartisan. Well, who in the heck in this world today is nonpartisan? So I can see the problem with the General Assembly this time appointing someone and voting on that person. So please look at changing this so we can reasonably get somebody to be in that position, because it's really needed. And the other thing is in SB 202, any citizen can can go up and challenge, or else challenge by other means. If, you know, they know that there's maybe 5 houses in their neighborhood that they've moved out of state, and these other people are still on the voter rolls and they're voting, you can go and you can challenge those votes, but there's no immunity. I know people right now are still being prosecuted from 2020 because we did the national change of address changes on the challenges at the different counties, and they're still being prosecuted by Fair Fight. That is totally unfair. To have something in the law that says you can challenge, but we can't protect you. So there should be some immunity from reasonable, you know, some reasonable protection in that law. So that's just a few things that we need to get done. And I don't like the early scanning 11 days ahead of time, because if someone comes in during advanced voting, because we have 3 weeks of advanced voting, say, I changed my mind, or they come in to vote and somebody's already voted on their ballot because it's been stolen, those ballots should be traced and they should be able to get them back, and they should be allowed to vote. So opening in early days negates that process. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Sure thing. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Barbara Hartman. I have been a poll watcher, and I was an auditor, and also I've been a poll manager, assistant manager, clerk for the past almost 30 years
Where at, ma'am?
in Fulton County. And I've seen a lot. Day of voting is secure and laws are followed. Happy Faces, I poll watched Happy Faces. They it's a willy-nilly there. They don't follow Georgia code, and everything, if you're using another entity or service to do voting, voting is sacred. It should follow Georgia code, Georgia law. Okay, the BMD paper cost $1 a sheet, and we're given an extra 500 reams. Why are we using proprietary paper with Dominion, and why are we paying $1 a sheet for BMD paper? I don't understand that. I'm a taxpayer. Okay, and then what happens to all that extra paper? To me, that's a liability if there's no checks and balances or accountability for the extra paper. Early voting is when you vote early, that's done on BMD paper, and it's considered absentee voting. Now, as a poll watcher, I observed 2 women with a long table the same size as this, one on one end, one on the other. There were 2 young girls, looked like college students, and they were revoting the early voting absentee ballots, which looked very suspicious to me. So I called Ralph Jones over and said, Ralph, what's going on here? There's no checks and balances. This girl's taking a sheet of paper, a ballot, and revoting it on a BMD machine. And it could be my ballot because I early voted, and she could be changing my vote. So he said, oh, that's easy to explain. He said, this girl votes the BMD, votes the early ballot, BMD early ballot. When she finishes, she hands the 2 ballots, the one she voted and the other one, down to this girl. This girl does the same with this girl. There's nobody but those 2 girls at the table. Now they want a candidate. It's very easy that they change your vote, and there's no accountability. Nobody would know, no checks and balances. And I said, why don't you have someone from each party, a poll watcher from each party there to observe? And he said, oh, that's easy to explain. I don't want anybody but those 2 girls to sit at the table. He had that kind of comment to me with everything I asked. A poll watcher from the Carter Center came over and asked me, she said, I can't, I'm a poll watcher, and I had a different badge as an auditor. She said, what's going on down there at the front? I went over, and she said, these people are voting these and sending these figures up onto the internet. And she said, I was told to get away, stay away from there. So I went down and looked, and because I kept calling Ralph Jones over, nobody paid any attention to me. And I asked Ralph what's going on, and he said, well, they're uploading to Arlo. And you had about 7, maybe 8 young kids there uploading these sheets that we as auditors had counted. Okay, the other thing, I saw the unfolded absentee ballots, supposedly mailed-in ballots. I asked Susie Voles, who was with me, I held them up to the light. I said, Susie, these haven't, how can they be mailed in? They're not folded. And she looked and she agreed. Then we started noticing that almost every one of those ballots was printed, was marked with no stray marks. That's impossible for hundreds of ballots. Most of them were in black ink. Also, back to the early voting, happy faces. They were putting their spoiled on the turned in ballots. None of those places, 5 I checked, not one handled the absentee surrendered ballot the same. They were writing with red ink on those ballots. The scanners do not read red ink, only blue and black ink.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, ma'am. What's your name, sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Knowlton Kidd. I'm the elections director for Douglas County. A couple different things. First of all, thank you all for hearing us today. Couple different things with the bill. The process the young lady was just talking about is duplication. That happens in every county in the state of Georgia as far as military ballots, and it is a documented case. That process, just like all others, I encourage citizens to come to their local elections office and participate in the vote review panel and audit panel. With the bill at question, Section 4, lines 61 through 63, with dictates the funding that a county's elections office can supply for, i.e. grant funding. I will say this too, though. The idea of not allowing elections office to accept grants, you're putting the elections office at a disservice, simply because when we think about elections and the elections process, we pay attention to these processes in large election years, but we don't think about municipal election years, special elections. For Douglas County, we received grant funding. We used that grant funding to purchase trucks. We purchased where we can house equipment and different things. So that election funding goes toward more than just that election year. And I would ask you all to consider that when you think about grants. The most concerning piece of the current legislation for me is the idea of bringing in the GBI. The Secretary of State's office has a more than capable state elections division that we're just bypassing with elections issues and bringing in the GBI, taking those resources from an organization that is typically used for that is typically used for federal or actual crimes, and having them investigate administrative issues. This body nor any other one has been able to point to any issue where we would actually need the GBI to investigate.
All right, so I'm gonna call on Chairman Martin. You have a question for me?
I did have a question. I want to go backwards there. I mean,
Okay.
Just, I'm not going to debate you about the GBI. I don't want to take the gentleman's time.
No.
away
No,
from-
Go ahead.
Okay,
We're
you
good.
just, I just don't want to take away from his time, but here's where I would have the GBI investigate. I don't know if it was real or Memorex, but I have seen video of a person fanning out things and taking pictures of them. I don't know if it's real or not, but that's where I'd want GBI to investigate and find out if it was real. I'm not saying it was or it wasn't, but that's what they do invest. That is, if in fact it was real, that is criminal. That is
Now,
a criminal
my
so, well, I mean, let's not, that's
okay,
just the point
no,
I'd say.
I'm gonna address that one. But my idea with that one is, though, when you introduce the GBI into elections or election space, it's going to have a chilling effect. It's going to have a chilling effect on poll workers actually wanting to be poll workers, which these are poll workers that have told me that have moved away from the election space because they feel like that these are actions that are going to come against them. It's going to have a chilling effect on voters participating in the process, because in most cases, most elections issues that the Secretary of State office has found, they're administrative issues, they're issues that the current mechanism can actually deal with, and I don't understand the need to move away from that.
Fair enough. We'll take that. But the one question I did have, and this is honestly, I don't know the answer to it when I ask you, how long have you been in your position with Douglas?
I've been in Douglas County for 7 years prior to Douglas
Have
County.
Prior to 2020, have you ever did you ever get any grants for elections?
Not in Douglas County.
Okay. or did you?
I have gotten election grants in other counties. This is my third county at this point. I've been DeKalb County. I've been Fulton County at this point. Elections officials tend to have to move between counties.
Yeah,
just
the
in order
reason
to
I was
move up.
asking that is that just around, I wasn't familiar with a lot of the grants.
Yes.
And my thought was many of the grants were related to, we were undergoing that pandemic thing, in 2020. And I thought most of the grants were related to that. And so I was just asking, I was unfamiliar with there being this widespread grant.
The
program
specific
that's been
grants that most in every county received were just tied to the elections office. They did not dictate how you necessarily spent those money. You had to give them an idea of the issues that you actually and challenges that you had, and then they allotted that fund, that amount to you and allowed you to justify how you spent it on specific areas. For Douglas County, like I say, we purchased a truck. The county didn't have the funds to buy a truck. We got nothing from the state government, but we have to actually carry out elections. And from the perspective of us, it helped.
But my point was you did have more, everybody had more struggles in 2020 because of the pandemic. My point was the grants came in because you were having to conduct an election completely different in November 2020 than you had ever had to contemplate before.
Somewhat. Most of the structure of the grants was just in order to it wasn't tied to 2020. It was tied to just the administration of elections, and elections are that happen more than presidential election years. We think about election years then, but those funds will help Douglas County for every election. Those are the municipals. Those are the ones that we don't get funding from the legislature for, but we still have to conduct those.
But again, I'm gonna go back to, I am not aware, I have not been told by any county that there was a grant program, a widespread grant program to counties in Georgia prior to 2020.
Every county in Georgia, prior to 2020 and before, every county in Georgia, even in 2020, the counties that got grants is because that elections supervisor went out and sought those funds. Every county could put in for grant funds. So to penalize the counties that did their due diligence to bring in additional funds, I don't see that as productive. But my last point before my time runs out. Essentially speaking, everybody has come up here and talked about drop boxes. The idea of drop boxes essentially has been nullified in the state of Georgia. We are allowed to have one drop box per 100,000 voters. If we have over 100,000 voters, we can have a second location in one of our advanced voting locations, but it has to be in the presence of a poll worker. So essentially that's in our office. That essentially nullified during the business hours that the hours are open, that essentially we don't have a drop box. That from an administrative perspective hurts the elections process. The idea that this is sitting right in front of the desk of a person, they're able to just take the ballot. Nobody, and 2021's numbers will show this. Compare 2020 numbers to 2021 with the uses of drop boxes. 2021 will show a significant drop in those use of boxes because of the provisions of Senate Bill 202, and you're adding provisions in this bill that are going to hurt the process as well. And I will be happy to talk to any legislature at any point on any election related matter outside of this time frame as well.
All right,
Thank you.
Mr. Kidd, you stirred up another question, so.
Okay, I got time.
This will be online, Representative Burnell.
Thank you. And thank you for coming, sir. I just had a question I wanted to ask you because I know that SB 202 and the new legislation that's being proposed is going to also add expense. And at the time, we never did have a fiscal note. So I know you were saying that you can't apply for the grants. So will you incur a lot of additional expenses with the upcoming primary and the general election this year?
Yes, and we will not be able to fund those additional expenses. Those additional expenses are going to be poll worker recruitment and retention. They're going to be actual costs with administering elections. And it is a shame to say this, elections are an afterthought except for major election years like this, which with a gubernatorial year. But those elections expenses have almost tripled and doubled in most cases. And you're putting the burden of unfunded mandates onto elections offices without allocating any funds to them. You can have what you want, but please give us the help. If you're going to take our ability to get grants, allocate funding from the state legislature to county elections offices.
Thank you.
Mr. Kidd. Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Joseph Kirk. I'm the election supervisor in Bartow County. Appreciate y'all taking time to hear from me today. I'm here to speak mostly in favor of this bill. There's a lot of good into this bill. Going from the back, having a definition for independent election officials is great. I love the poll watcher section and having more guidance for poll watchers and giving them more access than they have right now. I'm very much in favor of taking the advanced voters into account and absentee voters when we allocate voting machines for election day because of space. I think that's a great provision. Most of the chain of custody stuff in there is very good, and I think it codifies what we're already doing. And I do appreciate security paper not being in the bill, and I want to come back to that at the end if I have time. I have a few requests here. One, talking about grants and donations. I see what you're trying to do, but there's an unintended consequence here. I take donations, or I used to take donations of facilities from local groups. I would work in partnership with local groups, in-kind donations to help my office create community partnerships that really helped the process, helped, and take the trust that came with my office. So I ask that you exempt those small in-kind donations to facilities and allow folks to just go and donate the church, donate the Chamber of Commerce, rather than being forced to charge them under the current law. As far as Section 10 goes for poll watchers, again, I'm very much in favor of most of that bill, but keep in mind that it gives them greater access to personal information. They do need to take an oath for that, but other states have this thing called a challenger that we don't have. It's sort of like a poll watcher that's there to challenge the process and say, I don't like the decision you made right there. I want to challenge that. Goes to a different workflow. We don't have that. And if my staff has somebody stand on their shoulder, we do still compare absentee ballot signatures, looking at signatures with my staff, and they don't agree with something, they have no legal right under this code section to challenge it or try to stop the process, record information off of that or anything like that, which I think is as it should be. They would reserve the process, not the decision. So what I ask is, in that oath for the poll watcher, rather than that having that stay with the party, have that administered by the election officials when they show up, have the oath include the penalties for breaking the law, as well as what's expected of them, that they're there to observe, not to challenge individual decisions, and have that retained by the election officials as part of the record of the election, along with all the other oaths that we maintain. I think it's a much better place to keep them. And then that brings us to chain of custody. What I ask y'all to focus on is chain of custody when it really, I hate to say this, but when it matters. We have secure spaces that are access controlled. At least I can tell you that I do in my office. While we're in those spaces, we're doing our job. And having to say in line 351, seal accepted absentee ballots in a box that are still in their envelope whose privacy has not been, you can't be violated because it's in an envelope, that we have to unseal every time we go to put something else in the box, will significantly slow us down. We also audit those ballots going into election day. And my staff needs to get back in there to make sure we've done all the data entry right in the system. We've done everything that we need to do it. It's a constant process of checks and balances. The more we have to do in those secure spaces for chain of custody is going to take even longer. Or in line 543, you have us open the absentee ballot while we're getting ready to count it. This is in the absentee ballot area. They've been accepted. We've started counting them. Remove from the oath envelope, take the privacy envelope out and put it into a different sealed box when the next step of the process is to open that envelope and count the ballot. So having that, I see where you're going with that, but having that as a step in the process will just slow us down and delay the results even more.
All right, I need to stop you here. Chairman Martin, you have a question?
Let him continue. I'll hold my question.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that. And I'm almost done, I promise. I want to circle back around to security paper then. Security paper does not get us that much security. The security in elections comes from the process of issuing a ballot, accepting a ballot, and counting a ballot, not what the ballot's actually printed on. I'm not saying it doesn't do anything for security, but very, very little. That paper does not cost $1 a sheet, it costs 13 cents a sheet, which is still overpriced for that paper, I think. And the only scanners that can detect that paper are the scanners we use in the polling places on election day. not the scans to count the absentee ballots. So the only thing we're protecting against with that security paper is somebody getting their hands on a ballot, leaving the polling place with it, copying it, and then coming back in and trying to scan multiple ballots in an area that to be checked in front of a poll worker, scan it in front of a poll worker who was there to ask them, why do you have more than one ballot? I'm not saying we shouldn't use it, but to account for it by the sheet is going to slow us down. I was one of the counties that piloted the voting system in 2019. I had a poll manager who was an accountant, who took it upon himself to count all the unused paper that we sent to him. And by the way, back then we actually counted how many ballots were scanned by hand before we brought him back. It delayed him returning to the office by between an hour and a half and 2 hours, I believe. And they never got the count right. They finally just came back. If y'all want results fast on election night, you can't want the poll workers to stop and count the security paper to the sheet before they come back. It should be sent out sealed. It should be returned to us sealed, but the actual numbers of paper we're sending, that's just too much to ask. So the last thing with chain of custody, when we're in our secure spaces, those are secure. When things leave the secure spaces, they should be under seal. There should be chain of custody for that. When they're being used in the polling place, they're not under seal. Then when they come back, they're back under seal again. They stay under that seal until the eventual canvass, audit, and transfer to the clerk of court. There was a question.
I'll be brief. It's the hour's late. You've been doing this for a minute. How many years? If you don't mind?
I've been in elections since 2002 in Bartow County since 2007.
So you've been here a minute. Do you handle in 2020 and next year? Do you handle your provisional ballots, which is kind of the absentee ballot on election day, any different than you did in 2008? I mean, it's a bit of a trick question.
In what way do you?
Well, I mean, it's a bit of a trick question. I think what I'm getting at is because the 2020 election, would you agree that the difficulty to conduct that election in general was a little bit different because of the pandemic? With people that had voted,
but not from a chain of custody standpoint.
No, well, that's my point exactly. That's my point exactly. You have done a good job, with chain of custody, in the past. I guess my point is, isn't it true? Because there were so many people, so much confusion about ballots. Everybody was mailed an application for an absentee ballot. Some people will mail multiple ones. I had people that called me that voted it, that then got another one. So they thought it didn't count. So they went to the poll on election day. My point is that the confusion that went on in that election, I am hoping for your sake and all of ours, it will be less in 2022. I think we had a good 2021 municipal cycle. And my point is it was harder to handle some of that in terms of chain of custody because there was more of it due to there were more in numbers. Didn't you have more provisionals, more people walking up in 2020 asking to revote and that sort of thing?
Well, those would be provisional ballots. That would be asking to cancel an absentee ballot.
Okay.
We had a system in place for that to account for that. My IT department actually helped me out taking those calls and checking those. But the actual chain of custody for those ballots, if that's what you're asking about going out, when I send out blank ballots
as before.
Yeah, when I send blank ballots out for provisional, those are pre-printed. Those are on a heavier card stock. they look like a ballot.
Right.
Those go out under seal. I can tell you precisely which ballot numbers went out for those ballots and which ones I got back. The difference there between security paper and those ballots is security paper isn't a ballot. And to make it into a ballot in a way that would make sense at a polling place, that's all we're protecting against is votes at a polling place, not absentee ballots. There are other procedural steps that would stop that from being a problem. So again, I agree, we need to send it out under seal. We need to keep that under lock and key at our office, but accounting for it to the page gets us nothing but cost us a lot.
Okay. And that answers the question. There seem to be more of them because of 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kirk.
Thank you
I
very much.
appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, everybody. My name is Janelle Clodfelter. First, I'd like to say that I have been watching for when you were going to have a meeting. I've been watching very closely. I've been watching to see what your agenda is going to be. And last night at 2 a.m., I took a screenshot that showed an agenda that had nothing on it. And I need more time to study your agenda because I'm actually spending a lot of time studying 2020 elections. What I would like to tell you is there are a lot of things in the bill that I do agree with, but there are a lot of things that are very, very lacking. For instance, I could create a 1-hour comedy with tiny little clips of drop boxes that would entertain you for, you would probably rerun it because it is absolutely hilarious. From the chain of custody video to the fan that you were referencing, which by the way, was found at Swanee Library by someone in this room. So it is an actual video. And there are others in Gwinnett on video. I do think it would be wonderful if everybody here actually spent some time watching those videos, just one video. It takes forever and it is hilarious and it is very sad when you watch people getting ballots out of a drop box. They have no box, they have nothing. And they're like this, and they're doing this, and they're trying to keep from dropping them all over the place. You can't believe it's actually happening. And these are poll officials. So there are many issues, including the security paper, which I absolutely love and would be impossible to actually copy. When you have security paper that is easy to replicate, it's not security paper. And that's what we have now. It's easy to replicate. The one I've seen with all the beautiful UV light images is something you should consider. If it is only 25 cents, it's a no-brainer. But I would love it if you guys would spend some time looking at the drop boxes, looking at the data that we're actually looking at that came from the Secretary of State. We invite anybody in here to come and see it because it will blow your mind.
Okay.
And at some point, we will release it.
All right, Chairman Martin.
I'm gonna use up my last questions. I appreciate the lady's comment. I just want to say this for the record, if I can. This is in the form of the question, isn't true. We're focusing on the goings on at the drop boxes. Least we remember there are 10,000 of them across the state of Georgia, out in front of every post office in the world. The fellow that fanned out the stuff and put them in a drop box could have done the same thing and put them in a US post box out in front of that for the post office. So I guess I just want to encourage everybody. I believe you, what you're saying about it's funny doing that. I personally think there's probably more ballot security of it going through postal mail and landing at the elections office than it is going through a Dropbox. I would never vote a ballot myself and put it in a Dropbox. I vote election day. That's just my choice. But before we focus too much about what we're doing in front of a Dropbox, anybody that does that, if we put video on them and show their face and if they want to do it, they're going to go to a US post office box, Mr. Chairman, isn't it true?
No, they won't.
Well, they have for years.
Well, if I
because
could,
there's people. So I just, well, I mean, I'm with you. I want to secure
I
that.
understand that, but I want to
securing
respond
the- yes,
because the drop boxes, if you watch the videos, you would understand why what you're saying doesn't work. Because we see people doing the most unbelievable things at these drop boxes, and they are poll workers. Poll workers. And when you talk about putting it right outside the registrar's office, and it's going to be the poll workers actually working on these drop boxes, we've seen it all. So what I'm telling you is, if you would spend time looking at these Dropbox videos, you would understand where we're coming from as to why they're so insecure.
Okay, let me just, so you're talking about the outbound, not the insertion into the drop.
I'm talking
the
about
pickup,
both.
The ballots being picked up.
I'm talking about both, because the poll workers now have no idea that you are not allowed to put 200 ballots in that Dropbox. So they can be sitting there, or there can be a poll monitor, and somebody can walk up with 200 ballots, put them in, and the poll worker doesn't know. It happened in the municipal elections just recently.
All right. Thank you.
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Bell Hodges. I'm from Duluth, Georgia. And I also have some issues with the bill. Obviously, we need to secure our elections. There were so many out of the norm behavior over in 2020, including a pandemic that caused some of the confusion. But if we don't secure our elections, we do not have a state and we do not have a country. So I am definitely for a security paper. It's very critical that the ballots not be able to be copied again, counted. And it's also critically important that the people have the right to actually view the actual ballots if there is a need for it. Obviously, there's a need for it if we have to save the ballots for 24 months. So while I understand they interjected some of the wording of 933 into this bill, from what I gathered from Mr. Blackman, it sounded like there may have been, I don't know, a sleight of hand. I don't know, that it's an old wording that should have been Mr. Blackman should have been able to address his bill upstairs. We were upstairs waiting for it, and then we had shifted down here. So it feels like there's just this little, I don't know, it's a sleight of hand may not be a word I should be using, but it just feels strange to me. And then thirdly, I'd like to just say about the grants and the gifts. Somehow, when politics is involved, grants and gifts always come with strings attached. And if municipalities and small counties need extra money, then the state needs to fund it so it doesn't come with strings attached, because we don't really know with outside influence what's going on. Thank you.
My name is Stephen McReynolds with a PH. I live in Commerce, Georgia. It's an honor to speak to this body this afternoon. Thank you very much for hearing me. I heard the Georgia election official from Forsyth County mention the process of printing the paper ballot and bringing it to the scanner for purposes of tabulation or copying into the system with a scanner. There's one aspect of that, whether the ballot is serialized or not, or whether there's special paper or not, that I'd like to point out. I think it's been made public and it's been actually shown that our ballots are not really following Georgia law. They should not be tabulated according to a QR code that's on a ballot. They should be tabulated according to the printed, marked names on the ballot itself. By using voting machines that tabulate by something that a human cannot read, we're violating our own Georgia laws, and that is wrong. I'd like to address you folks and ask you to somehow address that and rectify that. We spend a lot of money on computer equipment to tabulate in this way, and it's violating our own Georgia laws. The second thing I'd like to point out is I'm a member of an organization called voterga.org. We requested ballot images from a very large county in the state of Georgia under open records request. They were unable to provide the in-person ballots from in-person voting on election day from 2020, but they were able and did provide images of ballots from some absentee voting. We examined and they posted copies of those images on a web page that anyone can access very easily. All the information, all the image files are in a place called gaballots.com. gaballots.com. Very easy to go on your phone or your laptop. You could go there and click on a link called Scanner 1 or Scanner 2 and see batches of ballots images. And what I'd like to point out to this body is that if you go there and look at those images, they have lists of TIFF files, which represent the scanned copies of these absentee ballots. And I'd like to point out that the timestamps on every file, almost every file in every batch is identical. And it seems that that would be impossible. The time resolution on the timestamp is only to the minute, but there are only 60 seconds in a minute. And many of these indexes have more than 60 ballot images on them. And it would be impossible for a scanner to scan like 100 ballot images in a minute and post the exact same timestamp. I would like to point out that this county that you can find out more about on our webpage, voterga.org, I think represented impossible information in response to an open records request. And I think something should be done about that. And I thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Colin Federato. I am the co-founder of VoterGA. I do have a handout for the committee for if I could leave with Ms. Aziz, and I'm willing to come back tomorrow. I know everybody wants to go home. So if you could tell me the time, Mr. Chairman.
Well,
that you
that's
will
what I was
have-
going
and
to tell
if-
everybody.
And if we could have an electronic copy. This hearing bill was not listed on a hearing. We've been trying to find out about it. So I'm happy to know if I can get the electronic copy. I would prefer to come back tomorrow and do that. Depend upon the time. if you don't
Tomorrow
mind.
at 10 a.m., we'll be back in, I think, in this room in 606. Is that right? Okay.
And are you-
Back
are you
here
not in
at 10
session?
a.m. I have 2 hours that I'm able to keep this room to conduct whatever's left of the hearings.
Are you not in
I
session?
do think that anybody that testifies tomorrow will be, it'll be a limit of time on that. I wouldn't say 3 minutes. I'll probably give them a little more, but at some point, the committee has to take up the bill and decide what we're going to do with it. We're running short of time. So we're going to have to, tomorrow's going to be the day we vote on it. Okay.
Okay, so that would not give us time to get our comments in
Well,
because,
this is only the first step to get it to rules and then over to the House. And then if we get it voted on and sent over to the Senate, there's another opportunity for you to work on it there. Okay.
and Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would like to thank Mr. Representative Williams for his interest in the security paper. I was there with Barbara Hartman when we found the counterfeit ballots in the Fulton County election results, and they're not military ballots or emergency or duplicates. We have already checked all that out. So they were legitimate counterfeit ballots and they're still there.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to adjourn for today. We'll be back here at 10 a.m. tomorrow, and we have a 2-hour window to get this bill taken care of. We're adjourned.